Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue here in our Happy Valley headquarters. We've got Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan still out in Indianapolis. They were all on the scene for Wednesday's coverage of Penn State. A couple James Franklin trips to the podium, 3 Penn State players out there the evening before on Tuesday. Athletic director Pat Kraft met with media for the first time in a while, and there's a lot happening in college football, a lot happening with Penn State specifically as well. So a ton to catch up on, and we'll go right to Lucas Oil Stadium right now with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see there in the background, the stadium is looming large. Penn State hopes to get back there in early December for the Big Ten championship game. A lot of teams out there this week want to get to that game and punch their ticket for a college football playoff appearance, perhaps. And Daniel, Mark, welcome back on board the podcast and appreciate the coverage you both have provided since landing out in Indianapolis on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's a great event. Great to be here. One of the really cool things, Tyler, that we're able to do is connect with all the 24/7 sports people from the network, from different sites. So that part of it has been very, very cool. But obviously, a lot of stuff going down the last couple of days, and great to be here on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium. It's, I may run 40 just to prove, that if the combine rolls around and they need me to get down here, I can run a 40, but maybe not then.
We may have a lot of Penn State guys to cover at that combine next year, just getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. And Daniel,
we had Olu. I got a good photo of Olu down on the field in advance. So I took a photo of Olu with the Lucas Oil Stadium thing in the back, knowing that he's going to be a dude here, next, is it, February, whenever the hell the combine is?
Right. Yeah. He's going to be one of those headliners we expect. And Daniel, we pulled you right out from your vacation and sent you out to Indy, and we just, there's no rest around here, right back to work. And look, you were churning out the articles on Wednesday, I should say, as things were coming out and into Thursday morning. We appreciate that as always. You were also on the microphone early on in James Franklin's press conference, and we'll start here because we have a lot of competitions to discuss across this roster. We'll cover a few of them during our conversation with you guys in Indianapolis. But Daniel, you brought up the quarterback spot, and I think a lot of folks nationally, certainly plenty of Penn State fans, think this is a done deal. They thought it was a done deal. Maybe they missed the announcement, but there has not been an announcement of who quarterback one is yet. And you asked James Franklin, what's it going to take to get there? What did you hear back?
Yeah, I think that some of the people that I was talking to afterwards were a little surprised by that because, especially within our network, everyone knows who Drew Aller is. He was 24/7 Sports' #1 quarterback in the class of 2022. That we saw him make those cameos last year. I think that nationally, he's really regarded as a name to know. So I think it surprised some people, but I thought it was interesting that James Franklin brought it up, that they're in the competition phase right now. So I figured it was worth following up that, what's it going to take? And I thought that he gave a pretty insightful answer. That was pretty interesting when talking about, going with your gut instinct and then also trying to square that with the data that you're getting, going through, the analytics and the statistics. So it's interesting. I think, James Franklin was quick to correct me because he said that there's a quarterback competition every year, which, I think the past couple of years, from our perspective, it might not have necessarily been, but it is the first year without an incumbent. So it is a little bit of a new landscape for Penn State. So, I think that, they're, at least publicly, they're going to give Bo Pribula make it seem like he has a chance to compete, to do some things, which, is their right. But I think that Drew Aller is really approaching things like, he is the starter. He's going to be there week 1, which is what you would want to see in a competition. So, James Franklin said the sooner the better. He didn't lock himself into a particular timeline. But I think that'll be something that, as we get through camp, as we get closer to September 2nd, when is that announcement going to come? When are they going to lock it in? When are they really going to start to, ramp things up with Drew Aller as the number 1 or Bo Pribula, however this shakes out in James Franklin's eyes?
I don't have the calendar in front of me, guys, but whatever that Wednesday is that precedes the first game week practice, so the final week of preseason camp, so that puts us into the August 20s. That's the last media availability before we get into a game week. And if we don't have an answer by then, I will be surprised. It may take until then to get a public answer, but look, the way that this team is being billed by the programs and the broadcast networks that are going to be broadcasting Penn State's game, and the way that Penn State is internally through their social media and what have you, promoting number 15 right now, you can kind of see how this is going to end, but you understand why he handles it this way. And James Franklin alluding to the fact that they consider every job up for competition in his answer to you. I don't think any of us viewed Taquan Roberson versus Sean Clifford as a storyline in August of 2021, but I understand why he tries to direct the train that way each and every year as he's putting this roster on the field come August. And Mark, generally speaking, when we talk about Drew Allar, what were you hearing among Penn State players? You got a longer conversation with James Franklin later on Wednesday afternoon, which was helpful for some context, a little more clarity on some things. What's the buzz around him right now as he gets set to return to the practice field?
Yeah, one thing I just want to let people know that the Wi-Fi here is really bad. So if we lag a little bit, just be patient. It will catch up. So we're going to be okay. I actually have a router right next to me. Daniel doesn't. But so just be patient. But yeah, I mean, I think the talk about Drew Allar it has nothing to do with his physical ability. I mean, every time Franklin talks about him, what does he say? He's 6'5", 245 pounds. You know, he can run, he can do this. It's about leadership. And you know, the one thing that he's going to have to do is step up as a leader. Olu Fashanu was one of the players here, you know, projected high first-round draft pick. And I think we saw in the spring the way he emerged. He's been emerging as a leader. And I was able to ask Olu about the incident in the blue-white game where Amari Evans was flagged for celebrating a touchdown. And Olu actually went down and talked to him and about those leadership skills. Well, we know that's going to come from guys like Olu, guys who have been around for a while. But by nature, the quarterback has to be a leader. And that's really, to me, when you look at where Drew Allar is, he's got what should be the best offensive line. And I know we've said this in the past, but it should be the best offensive line of the James Franklin era. You know, a lot of talent, deep. Two outstanding running backs. Outstanding tight ends who I think are being undervalued on a national level. And I think the receiver is going to end up being better than some people think. He's got all of the pieces around him to allow a young quarterback to succeed. But what is it all going to come down to? It's going to come down to when they're in a tight game and he has to step into that huddle, how is he going to handle it? You know, one of the things I'm getting from other reporters out here from other schools, well, if Allar's that good, why didn't he start last year? And I said, you know, they went 10-2 with Clifford. And you guys know I was one that after they lost those two games, I was like, give Allar a shot. And I proved to be wrong because Clifford was able to bring them back. I don't think they would have been better than 10-2 with Drew Allar. And I think long term, that ended up being a better situation for Drew Allar because he was able to learn all those leadership things from Clifford. So to me, and that's what the players are talking about how this guy's carrying himself. Now, it's fine that you're carrying yourself that way in practice, but how is he going to do a game? And I think I'm teasing, we're going to get to some unanswered questions. To me, that's the unanswered question is when push comes to shove, how is Drew Allar going to handle himself in tight games? My suspicion is he's going to do really well, but we don't know for sure.
They won 11 games. Sean Clifford produced a career best season, a career best game to really finish it off in the Rose Bowl. We've never seen him play sharper than that. And along the way, you had Drew play as much as any freshman quarterback has since Christian Hackenberg in 2013. So it proved to be a really good balance. There was a lot of criticism along the way and some hindsight 2020, and plenty of it came from this podcast in October and into November. But I think when you reevaluate it now, and so did I. And I don't think Daniel did it all. Daniel was always online with Penn State strategy. But we thought, you know, you look at it now, and we have a lot of distance from that season. And James Franklin, Mike Yurcich, the plan worked. And now you want to see the next phase of it, which is Drew Allar emerging as a player who has the experience in that back pocket and wasn't shell-shocked at an early age like some of these quarterbacks are who get to college campuses. And so that'll be a pretty fascinating aspect. Let me ask you this. Daniel, you have a good feel for where the leadership is in this locker room, how it's training. We know 3 captains at this point. I'd expect 5 more captains. We've seen this team have 6. We've seen them have 8. Do you think Drew Allar, assuming he's named the starting quarterback, and we are assuming that, is going to be a captain, because we saw Sean Clifford as a redshirt sophomore become a captain before that first career start as QB1. So I think, when you eye up guys, it wouldn't surprise me if in year 2 he ends up getting that label before he, takes that first start. Putting the cart before the horse here, but it was something that kind of popped up in my mind a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting little kind of wrinkle on things, but I think that this is a very prime opportunity for someone like Aller to really step up into this type of leadership role. We've talked ad nauseum about the leadership that they lost. Sean Clifford is a big presence to replace. Jair Brown is a big presence to replace. Jonathan Sutherland was a 4-time team captain. That's a lot. And we've heard a lot about how this year the leadership is probably going to be different, that it'll be, I think, a little bit more diffused between, more guys in terms of stepping up and leading their position groups. But I think that Aller is in a good position to really kind of assert himself as a leader. I think that's very clear that he has the respect of his teammates. Even hearing Keaton Ellis get asked about Drew Aller yesterday, you can tell that he has a lot of respect, and that's one of the captains who's already been named. A fifth-year state college guy who's been around, played a lot of football. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Talking to Drew 2 weeks ago at the charity event with Tony the Tiger at Giant, he's really carrying himself, like a number 1 quarterback. I don't necessarily think that there's any doubt in his mind that he is going to be the starter against West Virginia. He's really taking that approach. That's what you want to see. And I think that will really show in his leadership, with those wide receivers, getting on the same page as them, with the tight ends, with his offensive line. I think he's in a position to really, really be able to assert himself right now. And, honestly, until you brought it up, I hadn't entertained the idea of Aller being a team captain. I was, looking more, maybe Theo Johnson as that second offensive captain. But, I think that as Penn State turns forward, away from, the Clifford era into, this window that they're in right now, and what they could potentially accomplish, I think that could be a really, really interesting little wrinkle for Penn State.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're hearing some chatter in the background, Media Day is still going on. We actually just had Matt Rule walk by Mark Brennan right before we sat down to record. They said hello to each other. Mark, of course, covered him as a Penn Stater, but just in case, putting it out there, they are in the middle of a Media Day circus, and
we're on Radio Row, Tyler, and that makes it worse. We're on Radio Row, so it's like all these people who try to be as loud as they could possibly be, but everybody's having fun, and we're all getting along. So it's just part of the ambiance here. I did want to mention the greatest thing I saw yesterday. If you look at Daniel, look at that giant screen behind him. And that thing is like as big as like 7 houses. And when Franklin was yelling at him yesterday, Daniel was up on that screen. It was tremendous. And I'm kidding. He wasn't really yelling at him. But if you look at our photo gallery, I put that one in there just to have a little bit of fun. But I got to tell you, this is such a cool event. And just because you brought up hearing the people in the background, but you could see people walking behind us, and like right over here are the podiums where the players do their individual things. So it's a really cool situation. It's really fun to be here. And I know I went off on a tangent there, but I thought when you talked about the Radio Row stuff, that would make it a little interesting.
No, it's cool. And I just want to quickly, because I don't want to shortchange some of the other guys who could carry that captaincy. Aside from Drew Aller, Theo Johnson came to mind. I do wonder if, because of the offseason, off-field situation, will James Franklin follow through with that? Could that kind of get in the way of him being a captain one way or the other? I don't know. But that's in play at least. And then the other name is Keandre Lambert-Smith. I mean, Everything we've heard about him since the day the offseason started is he has bought in and then some, and he's always at the facilities, and it seems like that has sustained months and months and months. So he's the other guy where, if you're looking for where captain material, there's plenty of guys with captain material, but I think Drew Aller, Theo Johnson, and Keandre Lambert-Smith, when you look at who else on offense could get that that label this year, I think that's where I tend to look. Mark, going back to, before we get to some individual players, going back to that James Franklin podium session yesterday around noon, and then the follow-up, which came a couple hours later, what ultimately were you kind of taking away? What did you feel like was fresh to you? There's a lot of stuff that has been rehashed, a lot of the same talking points that we've heard from James Franklin going back to, last winter even, and it's on a national stage. You understand why that's the case, but looking a little bit more closer, our listeners, our audience, they know what's going on at Penn State day to day. What was some fresh content that you feel like you came out of those conversations with?
Yeah, one of the funny things about Franklin is sometimes he'll suggest he's not going to answer a question, and then he answers it. And I asked him about the timing of his NIL comments. So for people who may have been on vacation or weren't paying attention closely, he comes out of that craziness of June, and then in early July goes on the Adam Brennan podcast. Adam was here, by the way, as well. And says, Penn State's 2 years behind on the NIL front. And then obviously Franklin and the staff put out a bunch of tweets kind of encouraging Penn State fans, the 700 million or whatever it is, to start supporting NIL. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And what I wanted to know was, why pick that timing? It's like, I know, part of it, and we discussed it on the pod last week, is that June is such a grind with official visits and camps and players enrolling that, there's so much going on. But he said, first of all, he said, there sometimes reporters ask good questions that I can't really answer. And then he proceeded to answer it by saying the two collectives came together, so he thought it was a good time. And he did something which I thought was really smart, is he applauded Pat Kraft for the work that he's doing. One thing I've been critical of Pat about is that I don't think he's been vocal enough about NIL. And he's starting to be now. But I kind of understand now why he wasn't, because you had, these two different collectives, and you don't want to insult anybody, because if you insult one side, you may be turning off people who want to donate, or if you insult the other, it's the same sort of thing. And I think Franklin understands that, and I think Kraft understands that. And now that they're together under Happy Valley United, it's something that he was able to speak out about. And I think that's really important. I mean, when he put out his tweet in early July, the thing that jumped out to me, and I forget the gentleman's name, but one of the first person who replied, basically said, James, I'd love to help, but I don't know how NIL works. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, how could you be this far in and you have a longtime fan not understanding what NIL is about? And so that's where I think it's just vital that they're able to get that message out there. And people may say, hey, Brennan, you're asking a lot of questions about NIL. I'm just telling you, if they don't get this together and do it the right way, you are going to have problems competing at the highest level. And so I think he wanted to shock people a little bit. He didn't say that, but I think, he wanted people to realize, listen, people have to get it together and get going. So for me, when I heard what he said last year, yesterday, it's pretty funny, because most people say Franklin ducks questions or whatever. If you ask a good question, he may say he's not going to answer, but he's going to give you he will attempt to give you an answer. If you're professional and courteous and ask a question, and I'm not saying that's what I am all the time, but if you ask a question the right way, he's going to at least try to give you an answer. And he did that, and I thought it was a pretty good answer. So I know that was long-winded, but I think it was really important.
Well, there's so much going on with it, and we'd spent a lot of time last week. We had Adiza Isaac and Denai Dennis Sutton previewing the event that actually takes place tonight. We're recording on a Thursday afternoon. Thursday evening, James Franklin was in Indy giving speeches on Wednesday, and now he's going to be at the Jersey Shore on Thursday talking about NIL and trying to raise funds. And, it's been a lot of it between the lines, Mark, but now not so much between the lines. The big concern here, the flags that are being raised, isn't about Penn State being able to go out and sign a great freshman class for 2024. It's about Penn State being able to retain their 2023 stars, right, and make sure they don't end up with other Power 5 players in 2024 finishing out their career elsewhere. And I think that's kind of a paradigm shift where a lot of people are focused in on the prism of what's happening in the recruiting world versus roster retention. And Penn State's in a good spot. They're in an enviable spot in the scope of the college football universe. But if you want to be in that small cluster that competes for national championships on a perennial level, you really can't afford to slip up in these next 2 to 3 years and maybe even a shorter period than that.
Yeah, well, we were bombarded by information, and it's real yesterday. I mean, it's really, it's kind of an overwhelming thing as a reporter in a good way because it's good for content and whatnot. But it almost, I didn't realize till I went back and posted the video last night that at the end of his comments, Franklin said, there were other schools approaching our players last year, for to come and we'll you'll get this on an NIL front. Now, obviously, he didn't name names. But, he's not saying that. I take the man at his word. I really do, that happened. And if that's happening, again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. If you are not on par with where you need to be in the NIL space, you better get there pretty fast. And then there were good follow-up questions, too, about the topic. I'm sorry, I got something flying in front of me here. But that, to me, Tyler and Daniel, that kind of stuck out to me, and we can get into it a little bit later about what Pat Kraft had to say about it on, what was it, Tuesday? I'm losing track of my days.
Yes.
But from that availability, yeah,
we'll talk Kraft in just a bit here. But Daniel, going back to the Franklin commentary from yesterday, you were in front and center for a lot of it. You wrote up kind of your strong takeaways. You had a couple side pieces. One was about the quarterback spot, another about the special teams competition, and that's a bit of a can of worms right now when you review the whole roster and we talk about how it's as deep as it's been in all these different areas. And there's this emerging 5-star talent in exciting different spots. And then you say, oh yeah, you got to replace all the starters on special teams. And when you're talking about having no room for error, if you want to get to the college football playoff, because it's still only 4 teams and 1 loss could doom you and 2 losses almost certainly dooms you, man, this could make or break the team.
Definitely. It's something that whenever I write about special teams, I kind of try to frame it as that, when you're at this level, games are decided at the margins. When you're competing for a Big Ten championship, when you're competing for a national championship, things are, you can't afford to give up, a point here on a missed extra point, 3 points here on a missed field goal, a bad punt that leads to good field position for a field goal. Even if the defense is playing well, you go back to that 2021 season where there was some inconsistency, especially when it came to the kicking game at times. And, Penn State, I think 7 of those games were decided by single digits. And down the stretch of the season, they're on the wrong side of those. So I think that special teams is something that, you kind of have to remind yourself at times that it's something you need to pay attention to. But, Franklin didn't really get into the particulars of the battles. He did say that he felt that, Penn State needed competition at kicker and punter, which is why they brought in Alex Felkins from Columbia and then Riley Thompson from Florida Atlantic. He said that they felt good about what they had at long snapper because they had 3 long snappers. But you've got 3 long snappers, 4 punters, 2 kickers, and then out of that, you also need to find a kickoff specialist. We saw Gabe Wosu and Sanders Sahadak both get a chance to do that last year before Jake Pinniger kind of took that on down the stretch of the season. So I think that special teams is something that, I always say it's not the sexiest thing to talk about, especially when you've got position battles, with so much talent at safety. You're trying to figure out what's going to happen at defensive tackle where you have so many bodies. But I think that you really do have to come back, to special teams, to that unit under Stacey Collins. What is that going to look like? And James Franklin said that it's almost easier sometimes to determine those position battles because they have all the data from all the kicks. He said there's not as much nuance when it comes to picking a winning kicker. It's kind of like who's making all of his kicks, and then you go from there. So it'll be fun to watch that. It's something that I keep having to remind myself as we are going through the roster. But I think it's going to be really interesting, and I'm curious to see how much they really break it down into these roles as we've seen them do in the past, because they have so many options. And I think outside of long snapper, I think Tyler Duzansky has the edge there. But outside of long snapper, I mean, it's a really blank slate for them. So I'm really curious to see what this looks like, how they get there and how this shakes out ahead of September 2nd.
So much to figure out with these new starters and new roles on special teams, and it's an aspect of the game where, because these guys are so individually spotlighted during the matchup, if it's not ready to roll September 2nd, we're probably going to figure it out pretty fast, whether it's a punt return that gets botched, a punt that gets messed up, the snap, the hold, so many things that you need precise, and they've had precision in a lot of these spots for years now. Punter, they've had a really strong run for years and years, a few different punters, and Jake Pinniger finishing his career on a higher note than where it went for some of that time. Last year, not a guy you could really take for granted with what he did as kickoffs as well. So a lot to look at there. I'm going to throw it right back to you, Daniel, though, because wide receiver is another area where the competition figures to last deep in August, probably beyond August. Look, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Harrison Wallace, established as guys who had locked in themselves as top targets for Drew Aller in this offense by the time spring camp rolled up to a close. Then you had Omari Evans, who made a late surge, carried that momentum into the summer, built on it. Caden Saunders made moves during this second season on campus. You've got a guy like Liam Clifford, year 3 on campus. Their returns have been favorable. So there are so many names in the mix. I'm curious, coming out of this event, anything nudging in any directions in terms of what's happening at that spot, or is that just something we're going to have to all follow up on at media day?
I think that the real wild card with that group is Dante Cephas. What he is able to do, how he shakes up that group. In terms of where he falls on the depth chart. James Franklin. He leaned on the talking point that he's done since the end of spring, where he felt really good about the top 2, which is Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Wallace, and then there was a question mark at number 3. Omari Evans put himself in that conversation a little bit with how he performed and closed in the spring. But I think that James Franklin wants to see that continue through the summer. And, a guy like Liam Clifford is someone who kind of keeps popping up, the more that we talk to people. Drew Aller was really complimentary of him. Marcus Hagans was complimentary of him back in June. Caden Saunders is someone I'm excited to see, what he's been able to do, how he's able to transform his body to be able to contend and potentially make an impact. And Franklin, I think last year at the beginning of the season, he came out and was excited about that wide receiver group. He said that he felt like they had a solid 2 deep across the board. I think as the season bore out, we didn't necessarily see that in the way that we thought we might. But I think that, he kind of inched towards that again yesterday. He said that he's, starting to look more, beyond the top 3. He's trying to figure out what that 2 deep looks like, how those things shake out. And then the other wild card in here is the tight end group. James Franklin, there was a good follow-up asked where, will you play more 2 tight end sets if you can't find a very solid third wide receiver? And he said, yeah, that, there's no hesitation to do more 12 personnel. We saw them put 3 tight ends out there at times with all of them, lined up, split out wide. I think he really likes that tight end room. This is the 3rd year in a row that I think this year he didn't say it was the best in the country, which he did last year, and Georgia fans were very quick to correct me on
He
social
said it's
media
as good as
that.
it's been, though. He said yesterday it's as good as it's been. So
he kept it within the context of his program this time. So, I think that he's in I think the tight end group, with what Theo Johnson's able to do. Khalil Dinkins is someone who got brought up yesterday. Tyler Warren is someone who came up. There is going to be some good flexibility, for Penn State, if they can't find that third wide receiver. Of course, I think if you're James Franklin, you want to find 3 tight ends. You want to have 3 wide receivers. You want to be able to go 2 deep, across those 3 spots. But it's going to be interesting competition. I think Dante Cephas can really shake it up a little bit and really firm up the numbers there, along with Liam Clifford and potentially Caden Saunders, Omari Evans, how they come along. So we'll see. It's going to be a fun battle.
Yeah, two more names and two big bodies in that passing game. You may have mentioned him, but I may have missed it. Malik McLean, the Florida State transfer who now has those spring practices under his belt, 6'4" frame, was working his way within this offense, trying to find that footing. Curious to see how that materialized with the the work with his quarterbacks and his receivers away from the coaching staff this summer, and how he hits the ground running in August. And then the guy that I said was my probable number one pick at recess among this freshman class, Andrew Rappelier. I don't know what you're trying to show us, Mark.
There's guys posing for photos, players. I think they may be the Michigan guys, and it's Harbaugh's podium behind me. So he's on the other side of that. So I'm just
we're gonna have
people. I'm really tempted to unplug this and walk around. I mean, it would freak people out probably.
There's a lot going on around. No, don't do it. We're gonna ask because don't risk the Wi-Fi loss.
I'm doing it.
Yeah,
I'm doing it.
Okay, whatever you want to do.
No, I'm joking. Hey,
we're going to get a broadcast of Jim Harbaugh in the background of this podcast.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that I had the opportunity to sit in with Josh Pate for 247 Sports and CBS Digital. He had a one-on-one interview with Franklin, and I was able to be in there shooting photos. And I don't want to give away everything that Franklin said, but as you guys know, to me, Josh Pate is as good an interviewer as there is, if not the best interviewer. This guy is just absolutely terrific. And one thing that Franklin said to him, and again, I'm not giving away everything that Franklin said there because I'm sure we'll have video up on the site, is that he feels very fortunate with the stability they have at their coordinator spots. With Yurcich, you have Diaz back, and then going back to the special teams comments before, Stacy Collins has now been in the program for several years. So having that sort of stability, he really spoke up about having Diaz, who's a former head coach, that all has been very good. And the general lack of turnover with the coaching staff, the people that he's been able to have around for a lot of years, not as much turnover as there was in a few previous years, has been very good. So that was one thing. I'm sure when Josh gets that video posted, people will want to see it because, again, just a terrific interviewer, and he had a great one-on-one interview with Franklin. There's some really good stuff from it.
And look, there's two new position coaches. That's not a lot of turnover in today's modern college football. One of which is your decision. You decide to tell Taylor Stubblefield it's time to part ways, and then you bring in a guy who's essentially family with one of your position coaches, and Anthony Poindexter. So there's already a lot of familiarity there for Marcus Hagans at the wide receiver position. And the other, which is not your decision, you lose John Scott to the NFL. And you replace him with someone who's been inside your facility for a couple seasons already. So that's about as good as it gets in college football in terms of bringing back a staff and establishing yourself and evolving within 1 year span. Daniel, going back to the individual focus here, Olu Fashanu, a headliner at yesterday's event, one of those preseason honorees yesterday that they announced at the Big Ten Media Days each year. We were wondering how he would do with that spotlight on him. It's not necessarily to his nature. What did you guys encounter with big number 74?
Yeah, I think it was the same old Olu every year. He was getting a lot of questions about that Ohio State game last year. And what JT Tuimalu did, against Penn State, and he handled those very well. Was very, kind of worked through that. But I think the one thing that just always stands out about him, every time I see him now, is just how big he is. I feel like every time we see him, he looks larger than the last time. James Franklin said that Olu has put on 20 pounds. I think he was listed at 308 last year. The most recent roster update, he was listed at 319. So, who knows what he was walking around at yesterday in a, very nice suit. But, Franklin said he added that weight, but he was also able to improve his testing numbers, his 40 time, the various, jumping drills that they do. So I'm really curious to see what that looks like on the field, because it is kind of crazy. Like, we still have such a small sample size with him. We have only seen him do 9 starts. One of those was in the Outback Bowl where, I don't want to speak for you guys, but that game, I don't remember much of it just because it was at the end of the year. I think we were
Very
all
much
kind of
felt like an exhibition. Felt like an exhibition if ever a bowl game did. Yeah.
exactly. So, I think that, and so you really drill down and you have 8 games of Olu to really go off of. And, there's a lot of really high expectations for him. He could have been the number 1 offensive tackle last year. He might be the number 1 offensive tackle this year. Who knows what that means in terms of overall draft status. I think that he's someone that there's a lot of curiosity about as well, because he wasn't a 5-star who comes in and is a household name, on the recruiting trail from day one. So, there was, more eyes than I think we've probably ever seen on Olu. I thought that he really acquitted himself well. He's very genial, very thoughtful. I think this is the type of environment that he can kind of show, that he is a potential star, both in terms of personality and also with what he's able to do on the field.
Is year 4 for him with Penn State, but he's only 20 years old. I know people were like rocked last year when everyone kept saying he's 19, he's 19. Well, he's only 20 and got to campus at 16 years old and are just going on to 17. It's just a unique situation. And man, you just wonder, he could be in an NFL training camp right now, but for his longevity in this career and really what he could accomplish, it makes a lot of sense for him to be back at Penn State and going through this, I think, and putting himself in an even better spot come next draft and as a better offensive lineman with more seasoning. We'll have a lot of time to talk about Olu Fashanu in the coming months. But, Mark, another guy who I think, certainly wouldn't be surprised if he's named the captain in August is Adisa Isaac. We had him on the podcast last Tuesday. So don't want to cover as much ground with Adisa because he did it for himself here just a week ago. But those conversations with him, and I think just generally, Mark, he may be a little bit slept on because you can go through some of those flashier names, even at the own position. The recent 5-star addition with Denai Dennis Sutton, the guy that everyone's talking about as a first-round pick next year, and Chop Robinson, and then you work your way through the defense. Adisa's been here for a while. We started to get a glimpse at what he is starting to evolve to in the last month or so of last year. It feels like there's a launch pad there for him.
Yeah, I think he finally got back to about 100%, like maybe midway through last season. You could tell early in the year that he wasn't quite there after, was it the Achilles that he hurt the previous year?
Yeah, torn Achilles 2 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. And a torn Achilles for a gifted athlete like that, that a guy who depends on his explosiveness. And yeah, I agree with you. I think he is one of the guys nationally who's being slept on a little bit. I think he has run very well. And apart from that end of it, you mentioned about him, would we be surprised if he's named the captain? No, not at all. I mean, people who saw the pod last week can see the way the guy carries himself. As Daniel said, Olu was terrific here. Keaton Ellis was terrific here. And Adisa was really good as well. You get all sorts of questions at these sorts of things, and to be able to answer them all intelligently isn't I can't imagine that's the easiest thing because you don't know what you're going to get hit with. I mean, I asked him specifically, I said, everybody knows about Olu at left tackle. What can you tell us about right tackle? And he's extremely high on Drew Shelton. Talked about just the development that he made last year. And then talked about Caden Wallace as one of the guys who came in with him and is kind of grinding away and, what that may be like. So did you post that or did you write that story yet or did you post it? But that's going to be
we'll have a story up on we'll have a right tackle competition story up on Lines 24/7 on Thursday. So playing off of some of what Adisa said and also just some of what we've heard this summer.
But the point being, he's like he's sitting there at the podium and he doesn't know he's going to get asked about the right tackle. You know what I mean? And obviously just handled it effortlessly. So I would really look out that whole defensive end group, Tyler and Daniel. I mean, that group is going to do some damage. And I think one of the reasons is because they are so deep that they're not going to have to play all these guys 60 snaps a game or whatever it was. I know you're the snap counter, but I think they're going to be able to be fresh at the end of games and be able to do a lot of damage.
I think so too. And that adds up when you have this kind of talent on the edge. And James Franklin keeps talking about what they can do at that position this season. And those two players, Denai Dennis Sutton and Adiza Isaac, on the podcast last week. And I know that they've kind of doubled down on that this week a little bit. Adiza out at Big Ten Media Days, but Amin Vanover, Zariah Fisher. I mean, they can't say enough about what those two veterans have done. Zariah Fisher working back from an injury in his own right last year. And then Amin Vanover kind of quietly going about his business as a rotational piece on the defensive front last year, maybe taken for granted a bit by the general Penn State fan, maybe by us as well, but a lot to appreciate about that unit. And then you had a story on Keaton Ellis, Daniel, and I know Mark spent some time discussing Keaton Ellis when we previewed Big Ten Media Days last week. The hometown kid, he could ride his bicycle to Beaver Stadium for games, and now here he is, year 5 on campus, taking advantage of that COVID eligibility, a team captain and a returning starter at safety.
Yeah, Keaton reminds me a little bit of Jair Brown last year, when Tig was here, and you could really tell what it meant to him and to his story, and, having this accomplishment in terms of, on his football resume. And, I think it was something similar for Keaton Ellis, where, he said it was an honor to be here in Indianapolis representing Penn State. He talked about learning that he was a team captain and just how honored he felt. And what that really meant to him as someone who grew up in State College, as a lifelong Penn State fan. He talked about telling his dad that he was named a team captain, and he said it was just a very, very emotional moment, for his family. He was asked about the community around him, and he talked about how much he appreciates State College, Penn State, being kind of part of the fabric and knowing people that are going to be there to support him. So I thought it was something really cool for Keaton Ellis to be here, to be able to represent Penn State, to be that team captain. And then he's kind of got to make it work on the field now. And that's something that James Franklin brought up, when he was asked about Keaton and trying to replace Jair Brown. He talked about when Keaton Ellis was a high school recruit, he's one of the in Pennsylvania. He played wide receiver and cornerback at State High and was a big-time playmaker. And James Franklin said that those playmaking skills haven't really been there for Keaton Ellis these first couple years. I know he did have a handful of forced fumbles as a freshman in 2019, but he talks about how Jair Brown was someone who the ball just kind of found him. That it didn't matter if he was playing center field, it didn't matter if he was rushing the quarterback, it didn't matter if he was making a play downfield. He was able to get to the ball, get it out, make a game-changing play. And James Franklin thinks Keaton Ellis can be that type of player. He just hasn't seen it yet. But as it goes through the spring and into the summer, I think Franklin said that he's really been able to see what Keaton Ellis, can do in terms of making those types of plays. So I think it'll be curious to see how this works. Anthony Poindexter also had really good things to say about Keaton Ellis when we talked last month. And it kind of echoed what James Franklin said, in terms of getting the comfort at the position and now being able to make more plays. But I think Keaton Ellis is going to be a really important player this year, both in terms of the on-field product with the defense, but also in terms of leadership, being more vocal and making, happen on that end.
Yeah, safety's a pretty fascinating spot. They've got 4 guys back who've played significant football. You've got these freshmen who that we like a lot and they think highly of, in King Mack and Dakari Nelson. Last year there was such a separation, Jair Brown and the rest of the group. You wonder, is it more of a cluster of guys at the end of the day when it comes to those snap counts versus someone separating themselves? But right now, already named a captain, Keaton Ellis in a good spot to maybe play a bigger role on this defense than what people maybe had him pegged for coming out of the 2022 season, especially with that depth at safety. Guys, let's finish off the Penn State stuff here with some Pat Kraft conversation. You guys got him before Franklin and the players Tuesday evening. Fortunately, your flights came through. You got out of Philly, you got to Indianapolis, and you were there for Pat Kraft's for Pat Kraft. Mark, I know you were pretty anxiously awaiting this opportunity because it had been a while, and college football has moved fast in a hurry. What do you make of what you heard from Pat Kraft? What did you get out of it, and where you still left maybe scratching your head a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just circle back to the NIL discussion that we were having. I asked him about James Franklin's comments earlier in the month, and Did he kind of view it the same way a lot of us did, as kind of a, I didn't say this, but a kick in the rear end for people to kind of understand what's going on. And he sort of talked around it, but I will give him this. Again, I just go back to, they were in a position where they had two different collectives, and we know that there was some infighting, some sniping between people. And that was a minefield that they had to work their way through. And it's, as an athletic director, you're limited in what you can do because you're not running these collectives. Somebody else has to. You're not allowed to. You're not dictating every single thing. So to be able to ultimately see the two collectives come together, I think had to be just a huge sigh of relief to him. But now I just think it's incumbent on him to make sure that message, that you don't have people saying to James Franklin, Coach, I want to help on the NIL front, but what is NIL? That's unacceptable. That can't happen. And I get why they were at where they were at, and you can't come in as an AD and fix everything in 1 year. So they got the two collectives together, and I think now it's incumbent on Pat to make sure that people understand how important, number one, what NIL is. If you're a Penn State fan and don't know what NIL is, Penn State is not doing its job. It needs to be able to get that message out there, and I think he can effectively deliver that message now that those two things are together. So to me, again, I know I harp on this NIL, but I am telling you guys, if they don't get it all together here, I mean, it's vital. It is absolutely vital, because other schools have their act together and are able to leverage these things. So that was the first thing. The Beaver Stadium, where kind of that is. I think I like what I'm hearing from Pat Kraft about Beaver Stadium much more than what we heard from Sandy Barber, because Sandy Barber, it was always smoke and mirrors, oh, we're going to do this whenever we're going to do this. He's actually giving us some concrete, literally and figuratively, info on kind of timelines, and not absolutely specific, but like realistically, you can see things that could happen. And I asked him about the beer sales, and he brought up something that I never even considered, even though sometimes I have to run down into the stadium at halftime to get photo cards and stuff, which is neither here nor there. But
beer.
Any fan,
to get a beer, right?
Yeah, to go get a, yeah. I wish I could get about 10 beers during some of those games, but yeah, the ability to navigate in that stadium, like during a game, is absolutely atrocious. And he said they actually had to cut off beer sales at points because the lines for the restrooms were like interfering with the beer lines. And I'm thinking, well, they probably could have had one line. You just go get a beer and then go straight to the restroom and then go back to your seat. But seriously, little things like that. Like, so when you talk about improving Beaver Stadium, the fact that he's thinking about those things that matter to the fans, the fact that he's thinking about improving Wi-Fi, those are the little things that I think a good athletic director really has to pay attention to. And I think now that he's kind of unencumbered by the collectives, now that's, and we'll see if it's been solved. I think it's been solved, but now that that's been solved, I think you have kind of a mover and shaker who can get things going. But let's see, again, now it's time for you to step up, Pat Kraft. Let's see how you do.
All right. Well, Mark, you just mentioned the stadium Wi-Fi for Beaver Stadium. Lucas Oil Stadium Wi-Fi is we're just hanging on. We're trying to get to the finish line here, so I won't tempt fate too much. Let's close with a couple questions here to each of you. We'll start with Daniel. Daniel, any sights, sounds, takeaways from the couple days you spent in Indy that we didn't hit that you can talk about on the podcast? I know you saw a lot in Indy, but that you can actually discuss with us. And any unanswered question that really stands out. We've got a couple weeks till that preseason media day back over in Beaver Stadium when we get rolling with our coverage in August. But between now and then, what's kind of lingering out of this event?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think there's a lot of excitement and respect, for Drew Aller. I think that's something that, in terms of, everyone that we've talked to, people within the 24/7 Sports Network, people that I know who cover other teams. I think the fact that James Franklin didn't outright say that Drew Aller is going to be starting week 1, I think that surprised a lot of people. I think that there's really a lot of excitement about him. I think overall, I just think that Penn State is in a really good position. I talked to Michael Robinson, the former Penn State quarterback, who is going to be part of NBC Sports' pregame coverage of college football, and he is very, very excited. He talked about being able to see this program be at this point. The fact he's excited to be close to it, to help broadcast it. There's an interesting nugget from him where he went to Verona High School in Richmond. He corrected me on the pronunciation. I got that one wrong when I asked him, but Penn State has 2 players on that roster from that high school on the roster, in Kavion Keys and Alonzo Ford, the Old Dominion transfer. And he said that Alonzo Ford was actually someone who was in a program that he ran at his high school, to help kids achieve, to, really put kids on the right path, and to see Ford come out of that program and then end up at Penn State. I think that was something that was really special to him. He said that he has a good relationship with Drew Aller, and they've talked about what it means to be a Penn State quarterback, to go through that. I thought that was really interesting. And then on the recruiting trail, there's one little nugget that got passed along to me where, Ethan Grunkemeyer, we all saw the highlights of what he did at that 7-on-7 tournament at Ohio State. It was a great highlight tape. I was talking to a couple people who were there and saw it. They were really impressed. And it turns out that, Ohio State came away from it with a lot of respect, for Grunkemeyer. Obviously they're set at quarterback, the level that they recruit at. But, it does seem like that Grunkemeyer is someone whose profile is really, really rising right now. And that it seems like Penn State could be in position for, twice in 3 cycles to really get a really, really good, solid quarterback, out of Ohio.
Daniel serving up the good stuff. He has a lot more for you at Lions247.com. Your Wi-Fi held up throughout that entire answer, so that's good stuff. You're done. We appreciate that. Stand by for us to finish here with Mark Brennan. Mark, a lot of good stuff there from Daniel. What are the observations that you kind of we didn't cover here maybe in the first 50 minutes of the show that you just think are worth emptying the notebook a bit here before you maybe forget about them on your flight home and return trip?
Yeah, I mean, unanswered question, right tackle. Whatever Franklin says, we know who the quarterback's going to be. And I like, as you said earlier, Tyler, I understand why he's doing it. I mean, because you just don't anoint somebody, but we know the quarterback's going to be Drew Aller. But I think the question on this team is going to be who that right tackle is. It's funny how nobody's saying that there's a competition at left tackle. There's a competition at every position, right? Not left tackle, not quarterback right now, because we know who the quarterback's going to be. And that's not a knock on Bo Pribula. I mean, he's in there competing. I know he's doing it. But I think that right tackle to see who ultimately emerges is the question on this team, along with the special teams that you talked about. The question that I've gotten from everybody here, national people, people from different schools, is this the year for Penn State? And Michael Robinson said it when Daniel was there. It's going to be, for this to be the year for Penn State, they got to beat at least one of 2 teams, right? They have to get over the hump that they've been unable to get over so many times in beating Michigan and or Ohio State when those programs are operating at an elite level. And both of them are operating at an elite level now. So we can talk about preseason, we can talk about everything, but it's going to boil down to those 2 games, in my view, for Penn State. Also, I wanted to throw out something. Michael Robinson, this guy is a star in the making, okay? He was great as a player at Penn State in his final year, struggled a little bit early, then had a nice NFL career, and then went to the NFL Network and has done a lot of different media things, and now he is getting a shot at NBC. And I had a chance to just BS with him because we're kind of friends, and he's like, man, this is the big one. This is the big one, and I think he's a little bit nervous. I said, dude, you have this. He could have done this when he was a player. And I'm just telling people, Todd Blackledge is going to do the color commentary for NBC, but everybody knows about Todd Blackledge. He's an established guy. I am just telling Penn State fans, if you loved Michael Robinson as a player, and he was kind of in a niche on the NFL Network, that if you're a real hardcore NFL fan, you knew what he was about in terms of analysis and stuff. Watch for Michael Robinson. He's going to be a star. It was fun seeing him out here, and I think he's going to do an absolutely spectacular job for NBC. So I'm really looking forward to that. It was good to catch up with him, and it was good to catch up with all the people out here. Again, the question for Penn that everybody's asking about Penn State, is this the year? How talented are they? Yeah, they're super talented. They're as deep as they've been, but you got to win at least one of those two games or none of it means anything, right? I mean, that's the position that we're at. You got past the 2 losing seasons. You got back on track next year. Now this is the year to prove that you're able to take that next step. You have your coordinators have been around. There's stability in the staff. You have talent everywhere. This is the year to take that step. And if they don't, it's good. I think it's fair to say now, and I'll say it, that it will be a disappointment if they're not able to win at least one of those 2 games.
James Franklin, like a lot of coaches, goes after this event and talks about chasing championships every year. Some years it feels a little bit more legitimate than others. I don't know if it's ever felt quite as legitimate as it does now. Maybe back in 2017 after they won the Big Ten title, but it feels like it's there for them. And you're right. That means the bar is raised. 11 wins last year, 11-2 finish, a New Year's Six Bowl. That was beyond expectations. Different storyline to play out here in the coming months. We'll be back out on the field in just a couple weeks for preseason camp. But first, we've got a busy weekend of recruiting coverage. We've got prospect camp on Friday. We got the Lash Bash on Saturday. We'll talk to these guys next week. You see Mark making his way around Lucas Oil Stadium now, giving you the grand tour on YouTube. Daniel, Mark, appreciate it. You guys get home safe on Friday, and great coverage from Big Ten Media Days. All right, later. We'll be back with Lions 24/7 podcast. Couple episodes coming your way next week. A lot of coverage between now and then over at Lions247.com. New recruiting rankings dropped today for the 2025 cycle. That means Penn State commits now have new rankings. That means a bunch of prospects across the region that the Nittany Lions are well established with now have rankings as well. Check out our coverage of those at Lions247.com, along with the prospect camp, the final elite showcase prospect camp of the summer for Penn State on Friday afternoon. We'll have live updates throughout for VIP subscribers. Hop on board. If you're not a VIP subscriber, 30% off an annual deal or $1 for 1 month. We'll talk to you real soon right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast. We'll talk to you a lot sooner over at Lions247.com. Stepping aside for now, I'm Tyler Donohue.